Welcome to class, everyone. Settle in, grab a seat. We're diving into a massive, frankly mind-blowing historical puzzle today. How exactly did a largely ignored stretch of wilderness transform into one of the most powerful countries in human history? We're unpacking 423 years of American history in this explainer to see how an underdog literally became a global superpower. It's a wild ride, so let's get right into it. Here's our syllabus for the day. We're breaking this huge timeline down into 5 quick eras. We'll start with discovery and colonial claims, move into the revolution and a new nation, and then look at the absolute frenzy of the rush for Western land. From there, we tackle division and civil war, and finally wrap up with becoming a world power. 4 centuries, 5 steps. Let's go. Section 1. Discovery and colonial claims. What's really fascinating is that North America wasn't exactly the grand prize everyone thinks it was. In fact, most of it was practically ignored for over 100 years. When Christopher Columbus sailed west, he was looking for a highly lucrative trade route to Asia, filled with spices. But his reality? Way different. He bumped into the Caribbean islands instead. No spices, but thinking he was near India, he called the native people Indians. When he reported back to the King and Queen of Spain, he had to admit he totally missed the spices, but hey, he found gold. And honestly, that gold was more than enough to satisfy the Spanish crown. Because the vast majority of the gold, silver, and huge populations were further south, Spain focused its empire there, mostly just ignoring the land up north. So while the Spanish and Portuguese are busy dividing up the globe, the English basically wait almost a century before seriously trying to colonize America. And it was a rough start. Their first major attempt at Roanoke in 1585 mysteriously disappeared. Literally just vanished while England was distracted fighting a war with Spain. They tried again at Jamestown, which finally became their first real success. Then you get Plymouth, settled by the Pilgrims. These were strict Christians who actually outlawed fun stuff like gambling and, believe it or not, celebrating Christmas. No way, right? But people kept coming anyway, and eventually the East Coast was covered in British colonies, laying the very early groundwork for the nation we know today. Moving right along to Section 2, Revolution and a New Nation. Fast forward to the mid-1700s, and the map is getting super complicated. The British are crowding the East Coast, the French are claiming the entire middle of the continent, and a massive clash is just inevitable. So, who do you think wins this French and Indian war matchup? On one side, you've got the British colonies with a population of over 1 million people, plus their Indian allies. On the other side, New France, with a tiny population of maybe 60,000 and their Indian allies. Yeah, you guessed it, the British absolutely crushed them. France was forced to give up Canada and parts of Louisiana to Britain, which gave the British a massive footprint. But here's the catch. Winning wars, incredibly expensive. And this triggered a total domino effect. First, Britain spends a fortune on the war. To recover those costs, they turn right around and tax the American colonies. Well, the colonists protest, arguing it's completely unfair to be taxed when they don't even get a vote in Parliament. This disagreement rapidly escalates into a full-blown fight, leading directly to the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July, 1776. Now, it took 5 long years of war to actually win that independence, and their first attempt at a government was, quite frankly, a failing mess, where the 13 colonies acted like separate little countries. But they figured it out, writing a brand new constitution in 1789 and electing George Washington as the very first president. Which brings us to Section 3, the rush for Western land. Okay, so the new nation is officially established, but it's totally boxed in on the East Coast. The problem, its population is literally doubling every 20 years. All those kids needed a place to live. This kicks off an unbelievable streak of real estate acquisitions. And the most crucial starting point is this massive number, $15 million. In 1803, that relatively tiny price tag bought the Louisiana Territory from France. It was an absolutely massive chunk of land that instantly, literally overnight, doubled the size of the entire United States. So why would France sell all that territory? Well, Napoleon Bonaparte explained his strategy perfectly. He said, if we sell Louisiana to the Americans, they will be our friends forever, and Britain will be ours. See, Napoleon originally wanted an American empire, but he desperately needed cash to fund his massive wars against Britain back over in Europe. He figured selling the land to the Americans would fund his armies and, as a huge bonus, keep that territory out of British hands forever. The pace of what happens next is just staggering. 1803, the Louisiana Purchase. 1819, America buys Florida from Spain. 1845, Texas, which had broken away from Mexico, gets annexed. And by 1848, after a border dispute turns into a really ugly war with Mexico, the U.S. pays $15 million and takes massive northern Mexican territories. They also split the Oregon Territory with the British. In just 50 years, the U.S. stretches completely from sea to sea. Now, it's important to note this rapid expansion came at the direct expense of Native Americans, who were systematically displaced from their traditional hunting grounds during this entire era. And this obsession with land grabbing, it went to absolute extremes. Look at this humorous exchange summing up the real-life Guano Island Act. Is it covered in bird droppings? Yes, sir. Congratulations, son, you're standing on U.S. soil. Believe it or not, this was a real law. It allowed Americans to claim totally random, uninhabited rocks in the middle of the ocean for the U.S. just to harvest bird droppings for fertilizer. It really shows you just how aggressive the expansionist mindset was at the time. All right, Section 4, Division and Civil War. So while the borders are expanding and people are finding gold in California, the nation is facing a terrifying internal crisis. As the country expanded outward, it was tearing itself apart inward. The core fundamental question was what to do about the institution of slavery. You see, in the northern states, it was illegal, and many citizens considered it to be a great evil that simply had to be stopped. Meanwhile, in the southern states, slavery was deeply entrenched and considered a completely vital part of their economic system. These were two diametrically opposed realities, and the country had been bitterly arguing over it for decades. Everything finally hit a boiling point. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected president. Fearing he intended to completely abolish slavery, most of the slave states separated from the United States to form their own country. This rapidly escalated into a massive, incredibly brutal civil war that resulted in an immense loss of American life. Ultimately, the North wins the war, and the slaves are freed. This brings us to a United States that is finally reunited, but forever changed by the devastation. Now, even right after that devastating war and the assassination of President Lincoln, while the nation is literally just beginning to recover, they are still hunting for real estate bargains. Check out this number, $7 million. The Russian Tsar wanted to offload Alaska. So, after a quick, late-night negotiation, the U.S. agreed to buy the massive territory of Alaska for just $7 million. Boom! Another huge chunk of land added to the map. And that brings us to our final chapter for today's class, Section 5, Becoming a World Power. By this point, the borders of the contiguous United States are basically set. This prompts a major pivot from domestic expansion to overseas imperialism. The real turning point here is the Spanish-American War in 1898. Cuba was fighting for independence from Spain, and Americans strongly sympathized with the revolutionaries. Well, after a mysterious explosion sank an American warship, the U.S. demanded Spain leave Cuba. Spain declares war, but the U.S. rapidly crushes them. The U.S. captures Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Around this same time, American businessmen in Hawaii asked the U.S. to annex the islands, which they do, turning it into a vital naval base. In one swift stroke, America effectively dismantled what was left of the Spanish Empire that Columbus had started centuries earlier. This confident, kind of aggressive new diplomacy is perfectly captured by President Theodore Roosevelt's approach to the Panama Canal. The U.S. wanted to easily move its powerful new navy between oceans by building a canal right through Central America. When Colombia, who actually owned the land, backed out of a deal, Roosevelt didn't even flinch. He basically supported Panama in breaking away from Colombia, effectively saying, "Hey, Panama, welcome to the club of countries. We want to build a canal right here." And they absolutely did, finishing that massive, highly strategic engineering marvel by 1914. Which brings us right up to the dawn of World War I and leaves us with a phenomenal question to ponder. Should America mind its own business, or should it mind its own interests? Think about it. From a largely ignored stretch of wilderness, the United States had miraculously grown into a global superpower with the second largest navy in the world. As global conflicts began to boil over in 1914, this was the exact debate the nation had to face. And honestly, it's a dynamic that still matters in our world today. I want you to really think about that as you pack up. Thanks for exploring this incredible 423-year puzzle with me in today's Explainer. See you next time.